Welcome to Spicer and Company. I'm Sean Spicer.
And I'm Lindsey Keith. Well, for the second day in a row, the Supreme Court has issued a ruling by the Republican-appointed justice that dealt a blow to conservatives. Today, in a ruling handed down by Chief Justice Roberts, it blocked the president's efforts to stop the DACA program, which was set up to shield undocumented children and young adults from deportation. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later in the show.
Yeah, but first, we're going to take a look at the situation that's been going on down in Atlanta and what appears to be a rush to press charges against police by the city's prosecutor. Officer Garrett Rolfe is the officer accused of shooting and killing Rayshard Brooks in a Wendy's parking lot. He's been charged with 11 counts, including felony murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Now he faces the possibility of the death penalty or life in prison. A second officer, Devin Bronson, is facing 3 charges, including aggravated assault, and Brooks clearly had resisted arrest following a field sobriety test. He fought with the officers, he grabbed one of their tasers and pointed at it and seemed to shoot at them while fleeing. The DA concluded that Brooks did not pose a threat when he was shot. Is that a fair assessment? Joining us now, the chief of the Detroit Police Department, Chief James Craig. Chief, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sean. Glad to be here.
So, Chief, the circumstances regarding the killing of George Floyd and that of Rayshard Brooks seem to be very different. When you watch the video of George Floyd, there's no question of what happened there. I think, as a layman, it's pretty black and white. The circumstances regarding Rayshard Brooks seem quite different. What do you think of the charges that were brought against Officer Rolfe?
Certainly when I look at this, Sean, there are a lot of issues. As you pointed out, you can't compare Floyd to the situation in Atlanta. One of the big questions I have is, I know that there was an independent investigation by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, but did they wait for a proper investigation to be completed before the prosecutor made a decision? And if not, why not? Because if it was just based on video, then I got to tell you, I'm pretty good at making an analysis based on my years of experience. But even in this one, I have a number of questions. A taser.
This is exactly the point. When I saw the first video of George Floyd, I said to myself, why isn't he being charged right now? And all of my people that are lawyers and law enforcement folks said, it takes some time, calm down, this is the process. And yet it took almost the same time, if not less, for Officer Rolfe to be charged, which, to your point, I can't believe if it took 4 days for a clear-cut, at least in my opinion, issue with George Floyd, that it took the same and possibly even less in this Rolfe case, to your point.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. And if I have one criticism, it certainly gives the appearance that something's wrong. I don't know about Georgia law. I know that the officer was immediately terminated. Maybe in Georgia, based on employment law, you can terminate an officer's employment right away. So that's issue one. And then you look at the response by the Atlanta police officers, recognizing that if GBI made an investigation that quick and the prosecutor make a thorough decision, I mean, there were aspects of this case that I didn't know just looking at the initial video. Like, I didn't know at the conclusion or right after the deadly force decision, clearly the subject laid there. He wasn't offering resistance at that point. Right. And then I'm told that they gave additional strikes to the subject as he laid on the ground. That's clearly improper.
Right. So, Chief, let me just play you what the DA said to touch on the point that you just made regarding how he viewed this video.
Mr. Brooks never presented himself as a threat. At the very beginning, he was peacefully sleeping in his car. After he was awakened by the officer, he was cooperative.
Chief, never presented a threat and cooperative. Looking at the video, do you share that assessment?
Absolutely not. There was a point, admittedly, when they first had contact with the subject, it seemed like a peaceful encounter. He was under the influence. It wasn't until they began to place handcuffs on him that he began to resist. He absolutely resisted. Now, of course, the resistance that he was offering wouldn't warrant the use of deadly force to overcome the resistance, but there clearly was resistance. And then he takes his taser, removes it forcefully from the officer, runs a short distance, and then subject makes a decision to use this, what's oftentimes regarded as a non-lethal device. But certainly, if it was properly used against the officer, one could openly say, it could have been incapacitated him. And if that happens, what's next? But there was resistance. Running away is resistance. The force used has to match the force that's being. So I don't know. It's just so much, Sean, that I don't know about this case.
Right.
And but I'm just trying to use a little common sense.
Right. Chief Craig, thank you for sharing your expertise with us. I'm sure this is going to take a lot longer to break down, and I hope to have you back. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I look forward to it. You have a great day, Sean.
You too, Chief. All right, well, this week, President Trump signed an executive order on police reform, while Senate Republicans unveiled their own legislation to hold officers accountable. But a big issue is the reluctance of officers to flag misconduct by fellow officers. Check out this piece by economist Peter Morici in the Washington Times. It reads, quote, "The more fundamental problem of the industrial model of adversarial labor management relationships applied to police. Unions have negotiated rules and safeguards and disciplinary processes that make it virtually impossible to remove a bad officer until a terrible tragedy happens." And a recent Washington article analyzing a Duke Law Journal study on police union contracts found that 88% of contracts contained at least one provision that could thwart disciplinary action against bad apple cops. Joining us now, back to the show, former Boston Police Chief Dan Linskey. Chief, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
Chief, admittedly, most of my law enforcement understanding comes from watching all of the various Law and Orders. But there's so often an instance where an officer does something and they say, your PBA rep will be right here, don't say a word, and we'll kind of get you off. Is a lot of the problem right now that it's stemming from a system that doesn't root out bad apple cops when they have complaints against them?
That can certainly be some of the challenges, for sure. Myself and Commissioner Davis had brought charges against officers, terminated officers, disciplined officers, only to have those disciplines and those decisions and terminations overturned by an arbitrator down the road and have no ability to change that. So, I had an individual who lied to us during the course of an investigation, during a chokehold investigation. We lied about applying a chokehold. We had an individual who was injured. This individual had previously been involved in lying in an investigation and was fired for a second time, and yet an arbitrator returned them to duty.
Yeah.
So in some cases, the labor relations laws can handcuff the ability to try and hold officers accountable.
Chief, I don't have a lot of time left in this book, but here's the thing. As I talk to folks about the incident in Atlanta, one of the things that people keep saying is, well, they could have just let him go at this point and they could have just stopped at this point. My understanding is, though, if, like, say, for example, they didn't arrest him on a DWI and just let him stay there, if he had gone on and done something, hit someone with his car or committed a crime afterwards, wouldn't the officer then be blamed for not stopping him when they could?
In fact, we've had cases where, officers have tried to use discretion and say, you know what, it's okay, just, sleep it off, or, go home and everything will be okay. The person goes home, gets a second set of keys, and then gets involved in a drunk driving accident and kills somebody. And the officers and departments have been held liable and accountable. Officers do have discretion, but they also have a need to take people who are a danger to us into custody if they think that's in the best interest of our community at that time.
Yeah. All right, Chief, I appreciate you coming on and you continue to give us your insight. It's clear that this is going to take a while to get through, so I hope to have you back soon to break down where we are in this case.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate it.
You bet. All right. Does a runoff election involving Atlanta's district attorney have anything to do with the felony murder charges against the officer in the Rayshard Brooks shooting? We're talking to Washington Times legal affairs reporter Alex Sawyer next. And later, the mainstream media says Joe Biden holds a big lead over President Trump in many polls. But we're going to show you what a closer look actually reveals. Trump pollster Jim McLaughlin is here to break down the real numbers. Spicer & Company's just getting started, folks.